Now, let me share with you how this really started making my think here about a year ago. Bethany, our daughter, which, by the way, you guys are now supporting, and she's flying out a week from Tuesday, a week from yesterday. And we're so excited about this. But anyway, I called Bethany at 9:00 p.m. on Saturday. Bethany, at that point, was in Taiwan. Guess what? I was time traveling. I was traveling into the future. Because it was 9:00 the next day, the next week. Even though I was speaking to her on the phone, the sun was setting, it was 12:00 p.m. on Saturday. She was on the other side of the globe on the Sunday following the Saturday, talking to me at the exact same time. Now you say, wait a minute, what are you saying? I'm telling you, folks, listen. That's kind of weird, isn't it? Kind of freaky. You say, well, that's not freaky at all, but that's just because, you know why? Because we're able to look at this all at one point. Okay, you say, well, where are you going with this? Okay. Well, how many know that God is outside our time-controlled domain? Okay? We think in one dimension of time, past, present, and future, but the Lord doesn't think like that. He operates on a higher dimension. He is able to observe the past, the present, and the future all at the same time. Okay? Now, are you with me here? You say, this doesn't sound right. Well, listen, look. You look at the globe here, and you see, and it's kind of what it would look like if you would put it on a sphere here, and you've got this little time thing going on here. You've got man's past, man's present, and man's future, but he's outside of it, looking at it all at one time. Well, how many know that's nothing for God? Because, as I showed you a second ago, little tiny stupid illustration, and yet, folks, we do this all the time. We think this way because we're on a rotating planet. Now, with this in mind, let me give you a verse. See, some people take verses like this and they try to make it say what it's not supposed to say. This verse technically says God is not timed. God is not clocked in. In 2 Peter 3:8 it says, but beloved, be not ignorant of this one thing, that one day with the Lord is 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is one day. Now that does not mean that you can take one day and make it 1,000 years, or 1,000 years means one day. Basically, it's a quotation from Psalms 90 verse 4, where it says, 1,000 years in thy sight are as but yesterday. In other words, God does not think like you and me think, folks. See, we're basing ourselves on rotations of the earth, and we're going, okay, it's another day. Where's the Lord at? Well, another day's gone by. Listen, He's not thinking by my watch. You understand what I'm saying? He does not think on terminologies like you and I, where we're rotating in a circle going around the sun. That's not God. God's not like that. He is so far past that. Now, with this in mind, here's what I want to do. I want you to start thinking, if God is not in our three-dimensional world, what would it be like to be in a higher dimension? And the only way we're even going to get a feeling for that, and there's no way we could think past ourselves, because what you're seeing right there on either side is technically what four-dimensional things can look like and do, and that's pretty freaky looking. Okay, you got a box over there on the left-hand side that's doing some warping, and I don't even like that. Okay, you can get on the inside without going through the outside. That's incredible. But that's how 4-dimension works. But on 3-dimension, I can't work like that. But I want you to think about something. We can think lower. Okay, so here's what I want you to do. By the way, I want to ask you a question. Is everybody still with me? Okay. Now, you got to please pay attention, because I don't want this to be so far out, and it really isn't far out. It's just you got to really think for a second. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to step out of our 3-dimensional concept, and we're going to step down 1 dimension. The reason why we're going to do that is I'm going to show you how incredibly bizarre 1 dimension less is And imagine, with that in mind, imagine how unbelievably powerful one dimension above us is. Scientists are saying there's at least 10 dimensions and most likely 26. Well, nobody knows how to think like that. But that's why God says, guess what? My ways are a little tiny bit higher than your ways. My thoughts are a little bit different than yours, okay? So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to introduce you to Flatland. Some of you have been to Flatland before, so we're going to talk about Flatland for a minute, okay? Now, beings in this world have only two dimensions. Looking down on them, now I'm going to kind of have to ask you to kind of play along with me for a second, because what we're doing, Flatland is flat like that screen, but I'm going to set it up. Okay, technically it should be like that, but if I did like that, we'd all have to be on the ceiling looking down, okay? So we're just going to kind of rotate it a little bit. It's still flat, okay? But now, Flatland, when we look down in, what we're seeing is that we're seeing a world where they can only move left and right and forward and backward. They cannot go up and they can't go down. They can just go this way, this way, this way, and this way. Okay, does that make sense so far? Okay. Now, because they're two-dimensional, they couldn't go up and down because that would be, all of a sudden make them three-dimensional. So they're perfectly flat. As a result of being perfectly flat, we're going to look at them and they're going to look a little strange for a minute. The reason why they're going to look strange is, and I'll explain this to you in just a second. Now, Mr. Flat here, he knows only the flat world around him. He cannot see up or down. Okay? All he can see is along the flat surface of his dimension. So all he sees are lines. And by the way, this right here is his eyes. Forgive me, but this is his eyes. And the reason why I have to put his eyes there is because if I would put him where you and I are accustomed to putting eyes, he wouldn't be able to see, because it would be on the inside of him. So he technically has to have his eyes on the outside. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to see anything at all because he's flat. Okay, is everybody still with me? You say, where are you going with this? Well, it's going to be good if you just stick with me. We're talking about one dimension below us, just one dimension below us. Okay? Now, Mr. Flat is confined to the flat surface of his two-dimensional world, and he can only move within his flat surface. He can neither see nor interact with any part of the three-dimensional or the three dimension of a three-dimensional world. Although we are only one dimension higher than him, he will never fully comprehend us or understand our ways. Okay, let's stop there for a second. Do you understand what I just said? Mr. Flat cannot he can't understand me. He can't understand you. He is only one dimension below us, but he can't understand us because we are so far above him. Okay, now let's stop here for a second. In Psalms, chapter 8, God says, or David says, "What is man that thou art mindful of him, and the son of man that thou visitest him?" Watch this next verse. "For thou hast made him a little" what? "A little lower than the angels, and has crowned him with glory and honor." Now, believe this or not, we know that angels are a dimension above us. Okay, now I've got to remember, God has to be above that, but angels, and remember when Jesus told his disciples, now listen, and the first thing they want to know, Jesus, when are you coming back? Give us the date. Give us the date. Is it December 21st, 2012? Nope, that's not it. He said, now I want to tell you something. Why are you so wrapped up in your dates? It is not for you to know the times the Father has in his keeping. So don't worry about it. All I want you to do is go get the work done. I'll take care of when I'm coming back. Well, the Bible says at that point, he ascended before their very eyes. While that's going on and they're watching to get the last glimpse, Acts chapter 1 verse 10 says, "And while they looked steadfastly toward heaven as he went up, behold," watch this, "two men stood by them in white apparel." Where'd them dudes come from? How'd they just all of a sudden show up? We're on top of them. They didn't, They just stepped into the three-dimensional world.